I hope you have a peaceful night ahead. Tonight I'll share the story of the Aztec civilization. Close your eyes and relax. A brilliant civilization that once flourished in the land of Mexico. Let's journey into that story together. In the early 1300s, a wandering tribe settled by a lake in central Mexico. They called themselves the Mexica, but we know them as the Aztecs. Poor and powerless, this tribe was looked down upon by others. The good land already had owners. All that remained for them was marshland. But they had a myth. They believed the god of war had made them a promise. His name was Huitzilopochtli, where an eagle perches on a cactus holding a snake. That place would be their land. In 1325, wandering priests saw a vision. On a small island in the middle of Lake Texcoco, an eagle sat on a cactus, holding a snake in its beak. It was a divine sign. That very place was the Promised Land. Building a city in the middle of a lake was truly difficult. The ground was soft. The water was deep. But they didn't give up. They drove wooden posts. They piled up earth, slowly expanding the land. And so Tenochtitlan was born, a city floating on water, a city blessed by the gods. At first it was truly humble, just a few huts woven from reeds. But as time passed, this small island changed. People created something called chinampas. They scooped mud from the lake bottom. They piled it on rafts woven from reeds. When they planted willows on top, roots grew down. The land became anchored. Farmland on water had been created. On chinampas, they could farm year-round. Corn and beans grew. Squash and peppers flourished. The city grew larger and larger. Causeways connecting the island to the mainland appeared. Aqueducts bringing fresh water were laid. Canals crossed the city. People traveled the waterways by canoe. Entering the 1400s, the Aztecs began to grow strong. A king named Itzcoatl appeared. He was wise and brave. He made alliances with neighboring tribes. He joined hands with cities called Texcoco and Tlacopan. A triple alliance was formed. Together they combined forces. They overthrew the powerful kingdom that had oppressed them. After victory, Itzcoatl rebuilt the city. He raised temples high. He built palaces magnificently. Tenochtitlan was no longer a small island village. It had become the capital of an empire. The kings who followed him continued wars of conquest, north and south, east and west. Aztec warriors advanced. War wasn't simply about taking land. They had a more important purpose, capturing prisoners. The Aztec people believed this, that the sun needed human blood to rise each day. They believed the war god must be fed. Human hearts must be offered. So they brought prisoners to the temple. At the top of the great temple, a priest raised his knife. With a sharp blade made of obsidian, he cut open the chest. He removed the heart. That heart was offered to the sun god. It was a terrible thing, but to them it was a sacred ritual. For these ceremonies, war was constantly needed. With some tribes, they conducted something called flower wars. They agreed with each other and waged war, not to take land, but to obtain prisoners. The city of Tlaxcala was a prime example. It bordered the Aztecs, but was never completely conquered. They needed each other. The Aztecs needed prisoners. Tlaxcala maintained its independence. In this way, throughout the 1400s, the Aztec Empire expanded. It came to dominate most of central Mexico. Hundreds of cities paid tribute to Tenochtitlan. Corn and beans, cotton and feathers, gold and jade, incense and pottery. All kinds of precious goods flowed into the capital. Tenochtitlan prospered. The population exceeded 200,000. It was larger and more magnificent than any European city of that time. At the city's center was a massive temple district, a sacred space surrounded by a square wall. Inside stood the great temple, rising tall. A massive building in pyramid form. Its height exceeded 60 meters. At the top were two temples, one for Tlaloc, the god of rain, the other for Huitzilopochtli, the god of war. Climbing 114 steps, you could reach the temples. Those steps were often stained with blood, the blood of people offered as sacrifices. Around the temple district, palaces of nobles lined up. The king's palace was especially grand. It had over 300 rooms. It even had gardens and a zoo. The zoo held all kinds of strange animals: jaguars and eagles, snakes and alligators. Even people were displayed. Unusual people like those with deformities or dwarfs. The king's storehouses were full of treasure: ornaments made of gold, masks carved from jade, clothing made from colorful feathers, more splendid than you could imagine. The marketplace was enormous, too. The Tlatelolco market bustled with over 60,000 people a day. Even the conquistadors from Europe were amazed by its scale. They sold all kinds of goods: food and fabric, pottery and tools. Even slaves were traded. Cacao beans were used as currency. The more precious the item, the more cacao was needed. Aztec society had strict classes. At the very top was the king. Below him were the nobles. Nobles owned land. They became commanders in war. Commoners belonged to communities called calpuli. Together they farmed the land. They paid taxes. Commoners could become nobles if they distinguished themselves in war. Brave warriors were respected. At the very bottom were slaves. People who couldn't pay debts. People who committed crimes. Some war prisoners also became slaves. But Aztec slavery was somewhat different from elsewhere. A slave's children were free. Slaves could save money to buy their freedom. It wasn't complete ownership. It was a temporary status. The Aztec people valued education highly. All children went to school. Commoner children attended the Telpashkali. There they learned farming and war, song and dance. Noble children went to the Kalmakak. They received a higher level of education. They learned writing and astronomy, history and religion. The Aztecs had writing, though not a complete writing system. They kept records with picture writing. In books called codices, they recorded history, rituals and taxes. Paper was made from tree bark. They called it amate. On it they drew pictures. They applied colors: red and blue, yellow and black, vivid colors. Astronomy also developed. Observing the night sky, they recorded the movements of stars. They created calendars: a 260-day religious calendar, a 365-day solar calendar. The two calendars meshed and turned together. Every 52 years, a special day came. Both calendars started on the same day. When that day came, they held a great ceremony. They feared the world might end. They extinguished all fires. They lit new ones. A new 52 years was beginning. Medicine also developed in its own way. There were many treatments using medicinal herbs. They knew the medicinal properties of hundreds of plants. They also performed surgery. With obsidian knives, they lanced boils. They stitched wounds. Art was also brilliant: sculpture and painting, goldwork and featherwork, all of high quality. Featherwork in particular was unique. Green feathers from the Quetzal bird were more precious than gold. With those feathers, they made the king's headdress, splendid and beautiful, each feather carefully attached. Music and dance were also important. In the plaza before the temple, people gathered to dance. To the sound of drums and flutes, they danced all night long. Food culture was also rich. Corn was the staple food. They made tortillas to eat, beans and peppers, tomatoes and avocados, all native to Mexico. Chocolate also came from the Aztecs. They ground cacao. They mixed it with water. They whipped it into foam to drink. It was a beverage for kings and nobles. Sometimes they added vanilla or peppers. They raised turkeys to eat. They also bred dogs for food. From the lake, they caught fish. They ate insects too. Fried grasshoppers were a delicacy. But behind all this splendor was a dark shadow: endless war and human sacrifice. The conquered tribes feared the Aztecs, but also hated them. They had to pay heavy taxes. Their children were taken as sacrifices. That resentment piled up and up, waiting for the day it would explode. Entering the 1500s, the empire reached its peak. Moctezuma II became king. He ascended to the throne at 18 years old. He was intelligent and devout. He spent much time in the temple. He was devoted to serving the gods. During his reign, Tenochtitlan became even more magnificent. But strange omens appeared. From around 1510, ominous things began happening. A comet crossed the sky. The temple caught fire. The lake water suddenly boiled up. A woman's crying was heard every night. The cry of my children, where are you going? There was a prophecy that the god Quetzalcoatl would someday return from the east. He was the god of wisdom, the god of wind. Long ago, he had departed across the eastern sea. People believed he would return someday. They said the year of his return would be the year one reed. 1519 was precisely the year one reed. That spring, strange ships appeared on the eastern coast. Enormous ships, with white cloth catching the wind. They came cutting through the waves. Coastal people were astonished. They sent messengers to Tenochtitlan. Moctezuma heard the report. He fell into deep thought, wondering if perhaps Quetzalcoatl had returned. The people who stepped off those ships looked like nothing ever seen before. Their skin was white. They had beards. They wore clothes made of iron. They carried weapons like lightning. They rode horses. The Aztec people had never seen horses. They thought person and beast were one. The leader of those strange people was named Hernán Cortés, a conquistador from Spain. He was a man of great ambition. He had come to find gold, to conquer new lands. Cortés was clever. He treated the tribes he met on the coast kindly. He gave gifts. He proposed alliances. He especially succeeded in winning over the Tlaxcalan people. They had long been enemies of the Aztecs. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so they joined hands. Moctezuma was troubled. Should he stop them? Or should he receive them? He asked the priests. He consulted divinations. The answer wasn't clear. In the end, he sent envoys, loaded with magnificent gifts to Cortés. A disc made of gold, a moon made of silver, feather decorations and jade necklaces. But these gifts became poison instead. Cortés's eyes lit up at the sight of gold. He became certain there must be more. He decided to head for Tenochtitlan. In November 1519, Cortés and his army arrived at the capital. Moctezuma personally went out to greet them, riding in a golden litter, leading a splendid procession. He welcomed them grandly. The two men came face to face, two men from completely different worlds. One was the representative of the gods, king of a vast empire. The other was a greedy adventurer from across a distant sea. No one knew then that their meeting would decide the fate of the Aztec civilization, the end of a brilliant empire. That sad story was just beginning. The day Cortés entered Tenochtitlan, the entire city held its breath. Spanish soldiers couldn't believe their eyes. A massive city floating on a lake. It was far more magnificent than they had imagined. Canoes traveled along the canals. Wide avenues paved with stone stretched out. Palaces and temples glittered in the sunlight. One soldier later wrote a record. He said it felt like being in a dream. Moctezuma had Cortés and his party stay in one of the royal palaces. It was the Axiacatl Palace, a spacious and luxurious place, rooms decorated with gold. There were gardens and fountains. Every day, food was brought from the palace. Turkey dishes and tortillas, fresh fruit and chocolate. The Spanish had never received such treatment. But Cortés did not let his guard down. They were few in number. They were in the heart of enemy territory. About 600 Spanish soldiers and several thousand Tlaxcalan allies. Meanwhile, Tenochtitlan had tens of thousands of warriors. They could be attacked at any time. A few days later, Cortés made a bold decision. He decided to take Moctezuma hostage. He needed a pretext. Just then, news came from the coast. Several Spanish soldiers had been killed by Aztec warriors. Cortés went to find Moctezuma. Politely but firmly he spoke. To investigate the incident on the coast, you must come to our quarters. Moctezuma was flustered. He refused, but Cortés would not back down. Spanish soldiers placed hands on their swords. In the end, Moctezuma followed. He feared his own subjects might take up weapons in alarm, and so the emperor of an empire became a prisoner in his own city. It was an unbelievable thing, but it actually happened. Moctezuma continued to stay in the Spanish quarters. Outwardly, he seemed free, but in reality, he was a hostage. His subjects came to discuss state affairs. But every decision had to consider Cortés. The Aztec nobles were furious. Their king held captive by foreigners. But Moctezuma stopped them. No armed conflict. It would cause greater bloodshed. During this time, Cortés explored the city. Where was the gold? How many temples were there? How many warriors? He assessed everything. Then he climbed the great temple. Slowly, he climbed the 114 steps. The sight from the top horrified him. Blood was dried on the altar. Human skulls were piled up. Thousands of skulls were embedded in the walls. Traces of human sacrifice. Cortés spoke to Moctezuma. Stop these terrible rituals. There is a true God. Believe in Jesus Christ. Moctezuma answered quietly. Our gods have protected us. If your God is great, then our gods are great too. The gulf between them grew deeper. Different cultures, different beliefs, too many things they could not understand. Spring of 1520. The situation changed rapidly. Urgent news flew in from the coast. A new Spanish fleet had arrived. An army much larger than Cortés's. More than 1,500 soldiers. Their commander was a man named Pánfilo de Narváez, an army sent by the governor of Cuba. They had come with orders to arrest Cortés. Cortés had gone on an unauthorized expedition. Cortés made a decision. He would go to the coast himself to stop Narváez. He left Tenochtitlan with half his soldiers. He left command of the remaining soldiers to Pedro de Alvarado, a hot-blooded young officer, but not a prudent man. After Cortés left, the Aztec people prepared a great festival, the Toxcatl Festival, a grand ceremony honoring the god of war. Nobles and warriors gathered. They danced and sang in the temple plaza, wearing splendid feather costumes. Drums and flutes played. Alvarado was uneasy. He thought if so many people gathered, they might revolt. Or perhaps he coveted the gold ornaments. He made a terrible decision. When the festival was in full swing, he ordered the plaza surrounded. Spanish soldiers blocked the exits. Then they swung their swords into the crowd, at unarmed people who were completely unprepared. Blood soaked the plaza. Screams pierced the sky. Hundreds lost their lives on the spot. Nobles and priests, young warriors. The survivors ran into the city. News of the massacre spread in an instant. Rage exploded. Aztec warriors took up arms. Drums sounded out. War drums? People poured into the streets. The Spanish quarters were surrounded. Stones and arrows rained down. Alvarado and his soldiers were trapped inside the palace. Moctezuma stepped forward to calm the people. He went up on the palace roof to speak, but no one listened. The people shouted, "You are no longer our king. You have become a dog of the foreigners." Stones flew. A stone struck Moctezuma's forehead. Blood flowed. The emperor fell. Soldiers carried him inside. A doctor rushed over. But Moctezuma refused treatment. He refused food and water. A few days later, he died, abandoned by his own people, dying in enemy hands. The miserable end of an emperor who once ruled a mighty empire. Meanwhile, Cortés was victorious on the coast. He launched a night attack and captured Narváez, and cleverly made the enemy army his own. He promised gold. He promised glory. Narváez's soldiers became Cortés's men. Now his army numbered over 1,000. The joy of victory was brief. Urgent news flew from Tenochtitlan. A rebellion had broken out. Alvarado was surrounded. Cortés hurriedly led his army toward the capital. June of 1520. When he arrived at Tenochtitlan, the city had completely changed. The streets were empty. The market was closed. No people were visible. Only an ominous silence hung in the air. Cortés entered the palace safely. He joined with Alvarado. But it was a trap. Aztec warriors completely surrounded the palace. The causeways were blocked. The Spanish army was isolated. A new Aztec king was elected. Moctezuma's brother Cuitláhuac. He was a resolute man. He vowed to kill all the foreigners. The attack began. Day and night, stones and arrows poured down. They shot fire arrows at the palace roof. Water and food supplies were cut off. Spanish soldiers starved. The wounded increased. Horses died. Cortés realized, if they stayed here, they would be annihilated. They had to escape. But how to escape? Breaking through tens of thousands of enemies, while surrounded, was nearly impossible. He made a plan. He would use the night, a dark, rainy night. He waited for that day. The night of the 1st of July, 1520. Rain began to fall. Cortés gave the order, pack quietly. Take only the minimum. But greed held them back. Soldiers took gold. They filled their pockets with gold. Gold on top of heavy armor. Midnight. The party slipped out of the palace, quietly toward the causeway. They prepared a portable bridge to cross the canals. At first it went smoothly. The sound of rain drowned out footsteps. Darkness hid them, but a sentinel discovered them. The sound of conch shell trumpets rang out. The alarm. In an instant the city awoke. Warriors rushed from all directions. Canoes filled the canals. The nightmare began. Spanish soldiers were attacked on the causeway. From the front, from behind, from both sides. Arrows and spears flew. The portable bridge broke. There was no way to cross the canal. People jumped into the water. Heavy armor and gold dragged them down. They flailed in the water and died. Screams filled the night. They crossed, stepping on the bodies of comrades. The canal was filled with the dead and dying. They walked over them. Cortés fought at the front. Swinging his sword, he cleared a path. But there was no time to look back. How many people had died? Who had survived? He couldn't know. Only forward. He moved only forward. At dawn, the survivors reached land. A town called Tacuba. There they rested briefly. Cortés counted his soldiers. More than half were dead. Over 600 Spanish soldiers had disappeared. Thousands of Tlaxcalan allies had also died. All the cannons were lost. No gunpowder, no food. Most of the gold had sunk to the bottom of the canal. The surviving soldiers were wounded, exhausted and starving, plunged into despair. Cortés sat under a tree and wept, they say. That night people later called the sad night, La Noche Triste. But it was not over yet. Aztec warriors pursued them. The escape was only the beginning. The party staggered northward. They tried to reach Tlaxcalan territory. That was their only refuge. For a week they fought while fleeing. Every day the Aztec army attacked. Little by little their forces dwindled. At a plain called Otumba, a decisive battle took place. Tens of thousands of Aztec warriors surrounded them. The Spanish army had only a few hundred men. Only a few horses remained. It was a moment of life or death. Cortés looked around the enemy formation. He saw a commander with splendid feather decorations. He was the enemy's supreme commander. Cortés spurred his horse. With a few cavalrymen he charged. Across the enemy lines toward the supreme commander. He struck down with his sword. The feather decoration fell to the ground. The supreme commander collapsed. The Aztec army wavered. An army that lost its commander was shaken. The Spanish army broke through the gap. Miraculously, they escaped the encirclement. A few days later, they reached Tlaxcalan territory. Their allies welcomed them. Cortés had survived, but he was completely defeated. He had lost most of his army. He had lost all his equipment. An ordinary person would have given up, would have returned home. But Cortés was different. He vowed revenge. He would return. He swore to conquer Tenochtitlan. He spent a year in Tlaxcala. During that time, he rebuilt his army. New soldiers came from Cuba. Weapons and gunpowder were also supplied. And he prepared a secret weapon. Ships. He decided to build ships to fight on the lake. They cut trees in the mountains. They built 13 ships, small sailing vessels, designed to be disassembled and carried over the mountains to the lake. Meanwhile, disaster struck Tenochtitlan. Smallpox, a disease brought by the Spanish. The Aztec people had no immunity. The disease spread terribly. Tens of thousands died. King Cuitlahuac also died of smallpox. The new king Cuauhtémoc ascended the throne. He was a young and brave warrior. He prepared to defend the city. He stockpiled food. He made weapons. But people weakened by disease. Warriors reduced in number. May of 1521, Cortés returned. This time he led a larger army, 900 Spanish soldiers. tens of thousands of indigenous allies, and 13 ships. They assembled the ships and floated them on the lake. For the first time, they could control the lake. The siege began. They completely isolated the city. They cut the causeways. They sank the canoes. They made it impossible for food and water to enter. The siege continued for 3 months. Tenochtitlan was slowly dying. Food ran out. Clean water was gone. People ate tree bark. They dug up grass roots to eat. They even boiled leather to eat. Hunger covered the city. Disease kept spreading. After smallpox, other illnesses came. There was no strength to bury the dead. Bodies piled up in the streets. But Cuauhtémoc did not surrender. The young king vowed to fight to the end. The warriors would not back down either. Cortés gradually devoured the city. A little progress each day, advancing while destroying buildings one by one. They filled in the canals. They made roads. They brought in cannons. Fierce battles took place at every building. Aztec warriors resisted desperately. They threw stones from rooftops. They ambushed in narrow alleys. Women also fought. Old people took up weapons. Even children carried stones. Everyone tried to defend the city, but it was not enough. Bodies weakened by starvation and disease. Fallen morale. Dwindling forces. Cortés sent an envoy. He proposed to spare their lives if they surrendered. Cuauhtémoc refused. In July, the fighting became even fiercer. Spanish forces pushed into the temple district. The final battle took place around the Great Temple. Aztec warriors tried to protect the temple. They could not give up the sacred ground, but their strength ran out. August 13th. The last day came. Cuauhtémoc attempted to escape by canoe. He went out onto the lake with his family, but he was captured by a Spanish ship. The young king became a prisoner. With him, the Aztec Empire ended. Tenochtitlan became ruins. The once brilliant city, the jewel on water, had collapsed. Buildings were destroyed. Temples burned. Canals filled with corpses. Stench covered the city. The survivors left the city, staggering as they walked, bodies with only bones remaining. Empty eyes. Cortés's soldiers were also horrified. The horror was greater than the joy of victory. Was it necessary to destroy this much? But it was already too late. It could not be undone. Aztec civilization had disappeared. Spain built a new city on the ruins. They called it Mexico City. They built churches with Aztec stones. They tore down temples. They built cathedrals in their place. They built the governor's palace on the old palace grounds. The city of the conquerors arose. The indigenous people became slaves. They worked in gold mines. They worked on farms. They became servants on their ancestors' land. Cuauhtémoc lived 4 more years. Cortés took him along to prevent rebellion. 1525. When Cortés went on an expedition, Cuauhtémoc followed. Along the way, he was suspected of plotting. He was executed without evidence, hanged from a tree. The last king of the Aztecs died this way. Culture was also destroyed. Missionaries came in. They smashed idols. They burned codices, books recording hundreds of years of history. Picture writings containing precious knowledge. All disappeared into the flames. Some missionaries felt regret. People like Bernardino de Sahagún tried to record Aztec culture. They visited elders. They listened to old stories, myths, and history. They wrote down customs and traditions. Thanks to his records, we can know a little about the Aztecs. Without him, everything would have disappeared. The language almost disappeared too. The number of Nahuatl speakers declined. Spanish was forced upon them. Religion also changed. They had to convert to Catholicism. The old gods were forbidden. If you offered sacrifices at temples, you were punished. But it did not completely disappear. People secretly worshipped the old gods. They hid Aztec gods behind Catholic saints. Our Lady of Guadalupe resembled a goddess named Tonantzin. People worshipped the Virgin while remembering the old goddess. Festivals also changed. They became Catholic feast days. But old ways were mixed in. Festivals like the Day of the Dead. Food culture survived. Corn and beans, peppers and tomatoes continued to be eaten. Tortillas were still the staple food. Chocolate crossed over to Europe. At first, only nobles drank it, but gradually it spread. Now people all over the world enjoy it. Vanilla too. Tomatoes too. Avocados too. All crossed from the Aztecs to Europe. They changed the world's dining tables. But the price was great. Millions died. They died from war, from disease, from forced labor. 1520. Mexico's population was about 25 million. 100 years later, it was less than 1 million. Not even a tenth remained. Smallpox and measles, typhus and influenza. Diseases from Europe swept through the indigenous people. They had no immunity. Entire villages disappeared. Houses with no one left. Empty fields. Only silence remained. Those who survived also suffered. They did forced labor under a system called encomienda, in mines, on farms, working without rest. Gold and silver were shipped to Spain. Tremendous wealth. But that wealth was made with the blood and sweat of indigenous people. Mixed-race people emerged. They were called mestizos, children born between Spanish fathers and indigenous mothers. They belonged nowhere. They were neither Spanish nor indigenous. They had to create a new identity. As time passed, Mexico changed. It spent 300 years as a Spanish colony. It gained independence in 1810. After independence, Mexico rediscovered the Aztecs. They acknowledged them as their roots. They carved an eagle and snake on the flag. That eagle is the legendary eagle that founded Tenochtitlan. They tried to reclaim the lost past. Archaeologists excavated ruins. They found the great temple site in downtown Mexico City. 500-year-old stones emerged among modern buildings. A museum was built. Aztec artifacts were displayed in the National Museum of Anthropology. The Sunstone, a massive disc-shaped sculpture. Exquisite feather decorations. People come to see their ancestors' culture. They feel pride. They feel sadness. They remember the lost glory. Scholars continue their research. They decode the remaining codices. They learn Nahuatl. They restore old stories. Indigenous communities also remain. About 1.5 million people still speak Nahuatl. They live preserving old traditions. In their villages, they perform old dances. They sing old songs. They burn copal incense. They make offerings to ancestors. It has not completely disappeared. The form has changed, but the spirit continues. The descendants of the Aztecs live on. History asks us, how should we remember the Aztec civilization? Was it a cruel empire that practiced human sacrifice, or a civilization that achieved brilliant art and science? Probably both, because humans are complex, because good and evil are mixed. The Aztecs were like that too. They composed beautiful poetry. They created intricate sculptures. At the same time, they performed terrible rituals. In their worldview, human sacrifice was essential. They believed blood was needed for the sun to move. They considered it an act to save the world. By our standards, it is horrifying. But to them, it was sacred. We cannot judge other times and cultures by our standards alone. At the same time, we must acknowledge what they achieved. Engineering technology that built a city on a lake. Astronomy that created a precise calendar. Beautiful art and poetry. They valued education. They sent all children to school. They gave slaves the chance to buy their freedom. In many ways, they were ahead. Conquest must also be reconsidered. Cortez's victory was not inevitable. Luck played a part. There were mistakes. If Moctezuma had been more resolute, if Alvarado had not committed the massacre, if smallpox had not come, history would have been different. But it happened in the end. Two civilizations collided. One side collapsed. Countless people were sacrificed in the process. The victor wrote history. Mostly Spanish records remain. The Aztec voice is small. That is why the remaining records are more precious. Records written in Spanish by indigenous people. Documents in Nahuatl. Stories passed down orally. Through them we see different perspectives. The sorrow of the conquered people. Mourning for what was lost. An old man recorded, "The road was cut off. The temple collapsed. Our era has ended." Another sang, "We go and only flowers remain. Only beautiful things are remembered. Their sorrow reaches us across 500 years. We must remember that sorrow. At the same time, we must see the resilience of survivors. They lost everything but survived. They adapted to a new world. They preserved their culture. Mestizo culture was born. A blend of Europe and America. A new identity. Mexico's identity. Today, Mexican people inherited both traditions. They speak Spanish. They believe in Catholicism. But they eat corn tortillas. They especially love Our Lady of Guadalupe. The Aztec calendar stone became a national symbol, a museum treasure. Its intricate carvings. It shows understanding of the universe. Scientists also study the Aztecs. Chinampa farming is being reconsidered as sustainable agriculture. Herbal knowledge contributes to modern medicine. The world remembers the Aztecs as a brilliant civilization, as an empire that ended tragically, as a chapter of human history. They disappeared, but they did not completely disappear. They remain in genes, in culture, in memory. Walking the streets of Mexico City, past and present overlap. Aztec ruins lie beneath modern buildings. Riding the subway, you see great temple exhibits. Names also remain. Cuauhtémoc Street, Moctezuma Square, Aztec Stadium. In schools, children learn the old stories of their land, the glory of their ancestors. The sorrow, too. History has not ended. It continues. The descendants of the Aztecs live on, creating new stories. We also learn, understanding other cultures, drawing lessons from history, seeing human possibilities and limitations. Aztec civilization speaks to us about greatness and vulnerability, about creation and destruction, about memory and loss. Starting on a small island in 1325, building a great empire, ending in ruins in 1521, less than 200 years. A fleeting moment, but what is contained within? Every aspect of humanity is there. Ambition and fear, creation and destruction, glory and tragedy. All of that is the Aztec story. Now our story comes to an end. It has been a long journey, starting with the eagle on the lake, to the silence of ruins. The Aztec people believed. They lived in the era of the fifth sun. 4 worlds had perished. Someday this world would end too. Their world truly ended. But the sun continued to rise. A new world began. We hold that memory. We keep it from being forgotten. The brilliance of Tenochtitlan, the courage of Cuauhtémoc, the sorrow of nameless people, and the life that continues. People who still speak Nahuatl today. Hands grinding corn to make tortillas, small altars where copal incense rises. The Aztecs are alive, in different forms but continuing. That is the power of history. Even what dies does not completely die. Have a peaceful night. In your dreams, you might walk through the city on the lake, that place where eagles fly and temples shine, the beautiful world that disappeared 500 years ago.